Jeepers, this blew up. I haven't time to today, but I will make it my business to reply to all questions in the next few days. This happened a while ago, but decided to post today as she rang a member of the office and used the Human Resources Executive Assistant of unfair dismissal claim if she wasn't given a good reference. Not sure if it belongs in here or not. TL. Dear an office temp I'd spoken to a handful of times conspires to have me fired without my knowledge. It's a very long story, so be warned it's a bit of a vent. So, we had a temp covering maternity executive assistant that turned out to be a bit of a nut job. She was executive assistant to deputy CEO and seemed to think this gave her some sort of status. We'll call her the temp. I'd spoken to her twice, maybe Human Resource C, and was incredibly nice. I make it my business to be nice to everyone. What she didn't know is that from about a week after she started, I knew she was sending daily complaints, all unfounded and untrue, to my manager about me. My manager and I get on socially and professionally, and he was dumbfounded by her doing this. I still have no idea, executive assistant, why she did it to me either, and until today I'd put her out of my mind. We are talking 3 or 4 complaints a day and asking for stuff to be taken further, and why wasn't I getting warned/reprimanded? Whatever. What set our alarm bells ringing though was one day I was executive assistanting executive assistantrally and asked her to cover something that afternoon in person, to her face. She was nice about it and said no problem. I have flexi hours and get lots of time in lieu, so I'm not always there 9 to 5 like other staff. Often I'm there late or on weekends, so I have hours built up and let my boss know I'm cashing them in. We have an unusually complicated executive assistant system, and neither of us wants the paperwork, so I always need to see executive assistanter when I work them and when I take them. We keep our own record. On the day in question, I rang my boss, told him I'd spoken to her, and she was doing whatever it was for me. My boss rang me that afternoon and said she'd come in asking where I was and who was going to do the job she'd agreed to cover me for. She denied we had a conversation, and then she complained about my hours, saying I hadn't been there for hours on end and making up days I wasn't there. We had a record of that, of course. He explained the nature of my job. I'm executive assistant. I often wasn't at my desk and am available on a company mobile that she could ring anytime. She deemed this wasn't enough and basically tried to have me report anytime to her where I'll be and for how long. This is a temp, not even the CEO expects me to do this, so why does some barely age 21 and not full-time or in my department expect it? When she left, my boss called the person sitting next to her who confirmed I had spoken to her. We knew we'd have to watch her. Here's where the actual downfall started. In work, we supply long-life milk only and coffee. Everything else belongs to staff. This is widely known. It was told to people explicitly on their induction by me. Don't take other people's stuff. What's in the shelf marked staff you can have/share. I order all of our supplies, office and tea executive assistant coffee for staff and conferences, so the few emails I would get from her would be complaining about all the stuff she was using was running out and not being replaced. I would let her know it was mine, she could use a bit, but to get her own. I can't stand long-life milk, so I always bought my own fresh milk. Unbelievably, this will be relevant later. Kept going and got worse. She even took a few microwave diners on me. Others were complaining about their stuff walking too. The complaints from her continued, and I'd reply always by email and then say the same thing over and over, but no. I was wrong. Staff were to be supplied with the item she mentioned, and I had to replace it, and she would be forced to tell her manager if I didn't do it. I told her by all executive assistants, tell your manager. I always ask people to give any complaints they have about me to management, as I can justify them or explain why something won't get done. Of course, she never went to her manager. She just kept sending more and more emails in secret to my boss, and now others, with her making up conversations we'd never had and doctoring emails. Why executive assistant? It was getting to this stage. My boss would come over with staff member a printout every time, and I would show him my original email replies, given I never knew when she'd email. This was further proof I was telling the truth. He trusted me, but the independent staff member was us doubly covering our asses. We decided to mark what server tapes we used for the backup that day so we could retrieve at a moment's notice if we had to. We made note of it all, including incorrect timelines and false claims, and all false emails were verified by other staff to be untrue. We then just pretty much ignored her constant complaints. Her boss knew what was going on and admitted to ignoring the stuff she was doing, and said to me and my boss to her, ignore the temp's complaints too. Other staff were now reporting her increased executive assistancingly odd and vindictive behavior, and the deputy CEO apologetically said to my boss and I and several others to ignore the temp as she was desperate to not have to rehire when she had 2 months left until her usual executive assistant was back from maternity. Executive assistant. I'm a big boy, and with management's blessing, we just ignored the lunatic. If you're thinking the top managers in this place are shit, you're right. I'm riding this job out until my wedding is paid for and I'm out. So none of this our executive assistantly affected me. I just didn't want to lose to a moron at this point. I knew she was building to something, and at this point I wanted to see her go down in flames. Anyway, in a horrible twist of fate, her boss unexpectedly had to go on personal executive assistant pretty much indefinitely, and a replacement was rushed in to cover her. Then, like 2 days later, the bombshell dropped that the original executive assistant wasn't coming back, and the temps was offered a new short-term contract until a new replacement was found. Thankfully, this wasn't an extension but a brand new one, so she was on a 3-month probation again. Now, the new deputy CEO didn't know the lay of the land, and the temp was ramping up her operations looking for the now permanent job. With her old boss out of the way, she was now including her boss in backdated emails addressed to my boss and I as if I'd been part of the chain the whole time, ramping up the complaints to give off the impression that she is just banging her executive assistant against the walls with us doing nothing she asked. Now we knew with the increased executive assistance in complaints and her increased executive assistancingly hostile behavior to me behind closed door, we lined our ducks up. We basically had a running record, so we killed her with kindness and waited. The day came and she struck. Would you believe it? It started over milk? Even though I'm getting older and should know better, I love milk. I'll have a glass with my lunch, often more. Don't judge, it is what it is. Anyway, she is in the kitchen and I take my milk out of the fridge to take to my desk. As I'm walking out the door, I get, "Don't you think it's rude to take it all? Maybe some other staff might like to use that." I was having a bad day and had enough of this fucking minge bag. So I basically said she was too stupid to our executive assistant emails, so I tell her again it wasn't for staff. "We'll see who's stupid," she replied, walking out the door. I texted my manager and said D-Day had landed. Sure enough, an hour later, the human resources person comes in. We outsource human resources, and didn't even say hello to me coming in. She always swung by my desk. My boss has kindly printed out everything and is our executive assistant to bat for me. I play dumb when I am called into the room. The new deputy CEO has a thick file that the temp has compiled, and she basically starts grinding her axe about all the terrible stuff I've done to her, referring to the files, times and dates and whatnot. Now, given the deputy CEO doesn't know me from Adam and the human resources person doesn't the executive assistant with us day to day, they are buying the damsel in distress act. When I was asked to defend any point I said I wanted every complaint our executive assistant out, and once we'd gotten human resource every single thing she wrote, would I then put my case forward. They certainly thought this was strange, but obliged me nonetheless. We were there for about half an hour. The temp is crying at how badly I have ignored her, and how is it the company and my boss have allowed this TR executive assistant of her to carry on. It's getting hard to sit human resource this absolute character assassination, but I do it. They wrap up and I am asked to explain myself. I ask for my boss to be present and that I have 1 or 2 emails that can CL executive assistant this up quickly. In walks my boss with a stack of everything we'd kept. Her edited emails, mine between my boss and I, my time records, my job lists and logs, and even some invoices proving complaints she'd made about stuff not getting done was lies/wrong. I then said if that wasn't enough, I also could provide the list of tape numbers from the backup that could prove my emails were doctored by her, and also the list of staff that were present with my boss when he compared them. Then I finally showed various emails between the deputy CEO and I outlining what was going on. The Dep CEO and human resources lady just looked at executive assistant each other and said I wouldn't be needed anymore. The temp's executive assistanters changed to hysteria. She was livid, calling me a liar and that I was only doing this because she'd rejected a pass I'd made at her. It became that all the staff hated her and it was a big conspiracy to get her fired. She then tried to provide times and dates of when staff members had done social stuff without her and she was being excluded and harassed. She went on screeching for probably about an hour with anything, you name it, about how the staff and I in particular had fucked her over and that she see us in court. How anyone could have felt so victimized was actually scary to me. We're relatively small, and while I'd be the first to admit the staff here aren't my best mates or anything, they are pretty nice people. This is a nice workplace. This nut job made it sound like she was the plucky Cinderella of the story getting bullied by the ugly stepsisters. The last I saw of the temp was as she was marched to get her phone and her other shit at her desk and straight out the door as she wailed like a banshee. Today she rang looking for a reference, she won't get it. I don't care about my managers not doing their job as I don't plan on being here in 6 months' time. They are paying for my wedding and I'm going to bounce. If you are executive assistant, all that thanks. To the temp, fuck you, I win. Comment. You are describing someone with victim syndrome. There was one at the place I work who finished off the boss before I took over. They are notoriously dangerous and difficult to de-executive assistant with. If you see The Sopranos, Tony's mom behaves like this. She is described as having borderline personality disorder, but I don't think that's accurate. A key challenge is explaining their behavior to others as it is often so bizarre it's hard to believe. Common sense says people just don't behave like that without our executive assistant son. Fucked my life up for a while, but I got rid in the end. A good story for another time. I'm due for work. Comment. GR executive assistant post. Our executive assistant, the whole thing. I've experienced a few wackos, but none that I was able to orchestrate their departure so thoroughly. When I was young, I was part of a bunch of temps working at a bank. It was a short-term gig where we were entering in data that would eventually be automated once their new program was finished and our contracts would end. The one woman was straight up nuts. She was convinced if she did enough work, this obvious temporary assignment would turn into full-time work. She started trying to do other office member work wrongly and was eventually let go. She also had a horrible case of foot-and-mouth syndrome. Please leave your story in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to get new update. Thank you.